Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2023 horror film Late Night with the Devil. Now, before I go any further sharing my thoughts on this film, I want to address the controversy surrounding this film briefly. I have more in-depth thoughts on this topic of AI in the film industry uh, in a separate video, which I probably will have up by the time I upload this review. But I'm just going to share my thoughts on this topic real briefly because it really is the elephant in the room when it comes to this movie. So the the creators of this film, they came under a firestorm of controversy when it was revealed that for three different fake title cards for the show Night Owls, that the film is supposedly showing a real broadcast of, were created with AI. They were created with an AI art tool, and they were not created by real artists. And so that caused a lot of people to be upset, and they called for the film to be boycotted. They called for people to pirate it. They review bombed the movie with negative reviews on different platforms because of the fact that it used AI. And I get where they're coming from, but at the same time, I think the reaction was a bit extreme. And honestly, I feel there are other reasons to be disappointed or distraught or genuinely upset at this film other than it used AI for like 5 seconds. But that's just my take on it. Because I honestly was pretty disappointed by this film. I'm not going to sit here and say that I think it was a bad movie. I'm not even going to sit here and say that I didn't necessarily like the film. I would say I still wound up liking the film, but I definitely didn't love it. And I thought that it was just honestly fairly okay, maybe at most above average, solely for the things that it does right and the aspects of the film that I genuinely felt were excellent or quite amazing. But it definitely doesn't live up to its full potential. And I really feel that this is a prime example of a film where a completely unsatisfying, out of left field ending really hurts it. The film really lost me in the last 10 minutes or so. Prior to that point, I was really into it. I felt it was really building up to something special. And then the last 10 minutes or so, it just completely takes a massive swerve. And it goes in a direction that I don't really feel works at all. And that's because the film just doesn't really seem like it's building up to anything like that at all. It just all of a sudden is a completely different film now in terms of the tone, in terms of the story, in terms of so many things. And I really feel that because of that shift, it really undermines the movie as a whole. And that's why I found it to be disappointing, despite the fact that I did still wind up liking the film. It's still disappointing because of how good it was up until that point. And I'll explain why I feel that way in depth later on in the video. The film is directed by the Cairnes brothers. I probably butchered their last name, but yeah, Colin and Cameron Cairnes. And I don't believe this is the directorial debut for them. I think they directed some shorts and they did maybe one or two other indie horror films before this. So it's not like this is their first ever production, but you can still see directors that, let's just say, they're not as polished yet as some other people in the industry. So it leads to some moments where the lower budget really is fairly obvious and gets a bit glaring. And I do feel that there are some moments visually that are kind of inconsistent. It isn't always necessarily the most effective when it comes to creating a consistent sense of immersion, when it comes to it being a mockumentary or an actual live broadcast from the 70s. I think part of that is due to the fact that they didn't have a big enough budget, so it leads to some moments involving some of the effects that is pretty jarring. But other than that, I think it was still a well-directed film by both of them. I think they did a good job with the mood and that atmosphere. When it comes to a lot of the sequences that are just like your typical talk show from the time, I think they nailed it. And I really felt that they built a film that really provided a lot of moments for the cast to shine through and deliver some genuinely strong and believable performances. And when the film needed to have a sense of dread or needed to have a certain mood or a certain feel, I definitely do feel that they provided that visually, despite the fact that it is, for the most part, kind of a mockumentary for most of the movie. I do feel that it still had a nice, good visual flair to it, even when it comes to the scenes that are shot behind the scenes, where the cameras weren't rolling with the various different characters. Uh, that kind of reminded me a little bit of some of the off the cuff realism of something like Clerks. So I do feel that there's a lot to like about this film visually and a lot to like about this film from a directorial standpoint. And I do feel that these two directors are definitely two guys that I think are worth keeping an eye on in the future. That being said, I don't think they're nearly as good writing as they are directing. And that's a common thing I've noticed in this genre in particular with horror films, is that you have a lot of these directors who do a lot of these horror films and do shorts in the genre, and they show a lot of talent and they show promise visually and from a directorial standpoint, but they're just not on the same level when it comes to their writing, but they still write the film anyway. And I really feel that if you look at the other films and the other projects that these two have written, it's not really that impressive of a track record leading up to this film. So when you see what they are able to provide with the script, you kind of get why it does have this feel of an extended episode of a horror anthology. Uh, and that's why the film suffers from some pacing problems, and that's why the film to me isn't satisfying as a whole, because you have some ideas and some concepts here that have potential, but they're not fully realized or fully fleshed out. And because the writers are just too busy trying to be clever or twisty in the last 10 minutes or so, you get a film that just doesn't really feel complete. And that is something that I feel to be genuinely frustrating when it comes to this film and this story, because I thought that it started off really hot and really strong. Like, it was a really good start with the beginning of a mockumentary about this talk show host, Jack Delroy. He's competing with Johnny Carson, and the film opens up in a way that I felt was rather interesting, where it's like you're just starting up a mockumentary about this guy, about his show, and about this one infamous broadcast, Late Night with the Devil, where, because he's desperate for ratings and he's in a bad place due to his wife being sick, or his wife dying, Jack Delroy is now willing to do anything for ratings, and that includes bringing on a psychotherapist and her patient, who is supposedly possessed by a demon. And so, in typical talk show fashion from this time period, he has all these other guests for the show. This skeptic, who's also an illusionist, this guy who can speak to the dead, and it's this big spectacle. And the main hook of the film really is that you watch this broadcast and you see the live broadcast, but then you also see some of this behind the scenes stuff that's shot in black and white with the different people who work on the show, the producer, the co-host, the host himself, the different guests, and you get their candid thoughts when the cameras aren't rolling. And the script does a really good job drawing you in when it's showing the show and showing you the different segments of the show from the live broadcast, interspersed with the different behind the scenes sequences. And it does a good job making you think that something isn't right from the very beginning, that things are just off. And it really creates a good unsettling overall vibe that is genuinely unnerving. And I think the script does an excellent job building things up to the first time that we see Lily, and the first time you see the demon inside her make its debut on national television. And when you get the possession sequence, it's not really a possession sequence, but when you get to the sequence where the girl Lily winds up letting the demon out, and the demon decides to take over late night, and it becomes a pyrotechnic display. There's a lot of creativity there. There's a lot of fun horror film stuff in that sequence, and it then just gets crazier and crazier with the illusionist skeptic guy hypnotizing the entire audience. And you have this crazy scene with a giant worm and this guy ripping his stomach apart and worms coming out, and you find out that, oh, that wasn't real, it was just an illusion. The skeptic guy is trying to showcase and prove to everybody that this sequence of events with a live audience where they saw this girl Lily have a demon take over and start sending lightning bolts and floating around in her chair, that it's something that could technically be fake due to mass hypnosis or something. And then it just gets absolutely batshit insane in terms of the gore and violence, because then the demon in Lily just snaps and then just starts killing everybody. And like the girl's head splits open and there's light pouring out of it, and everything's just going to absolute hell, literal hell, on the set of this talk show. And people are getting just wrecked. The body count is rising, and then the film decides to become an art house A24 pretentious type of movie. And it takes a massive swerve, and it's a swerve that a lot of people apparently love. I'm not one of them, though, because I don't feel it tonally fits. I know some people argue that there's little hints here and there throughout the film that are hinting at this happening. I see that, like the guy in the audience who's wearing the skeleton costume and it isn't saying a word. The little sort of bits and pieces we get in terms of the guy who ran this cult that Lily was a part of, and some of the things we're hearing about the talk show host and Delroy, and how he's willing to do anything to beat Johnny Carson in the ratings. So you get little bits and pieces of that, or the fact that he sees his wife uh, on the set of the Late Night with the Devil broadcast. But it just doesn't click for me at all. Even though there's hints at it, it still doesn't click for me. It really doesn't, because it just feels like it's from a completely different film. Now it's a different aspect ratio. Now we're no longer on the set of the show. Now it's some hellish recreation, a reinterpretation of the show, Night Owls. And it's like a personal hell for Jack Delroy. And there's a whole sequence involving him with his sick wife. And I get what the writers are trying to do here with the subtext, with the whole thing about how he killed his wife and how all of this occurred and how he sold his soul to the devil for ratings and so on and so forth. I get where it's coming from. I understand what they're trying to do. And then you have the end shot of the film is it cuts away to the set of the live broadcast, and you have Delroy and he snapped, and and all the guests and everybody who's on stage is now dead, but it's insinuated that he killed them all because he just snapped and lost it and went crazy. And there's even like a bit that happens after that, like I think like the last few frames of the film, that make it look like you're watching a broadcast and there's a demon that's controlling it or something. And I'm like, okay, I get what they're trying to do here, but I just don't feel it works, and I don't feel it's executed that well, and it just comes across like it's just too far out of left field, especially when it comes to the tone and how it fits. And yes, I know, I'll repeat this, there are some hints at it, but that doesn't mean that it still fits. It doesn't mean that it still connects with everything, because even if there are hints at this ending with bits and pieces throughout the first half of the film, it still is something that undermines the entire movie. The entire film, and the biggest selling point of the story is that it's something like Ghost Watch, where you're watching an actual broadcast, something that actually happened on live television. And but instead of you just watching a live broadcast and a simulated live broadcast, and that's all that you get mockumentary aspects of it. So now it's like you're watching a documentary about this live broadcast and about Night Owls, the show Night Owls, and about the host, Jack Delroy, and what happened with him and his wife, and all of these other things. And it just stops doing that in the last 10 to 15 minutes. It just flat out decides, I'm not going to be a mockumentary anymore. I'm not going to even really be a live broadcast. Now I'm just going to be some half-assed Twilight Zone thing. And I just don't really feel that works. I don't. And I get that some people love it and they think it's something that makes the film stand out in a good way. I think it makes it stand out in the wrong way, because it really comes across like something where the writers were trying too hard to be deep, and instead of just making an efficient, effective, cohesive film. They wanted it to be deep, and as a result, you have something that just doesn't work as a cohesive whole. That last 10 minutes, however you feel about it, whether you like it or not, it doesn't fit with the rest of the movie. It really doesn't. It doesn't fit with the tone of it. It doesn't fit with the narrative. It just doesn't fit. It's like shoving a square peg into a round hole. It really is. And that doesn't work. And if you wanted to do that kind of film, you wanted to be deeper, you wanted to be more of a Twilight Zone thing where you don't know what is reality and what's not, then you should have been that from the beginning. Don't even bother to be a mockumentary. Just set it up as if you're watching a live broadcast from the very beginning, and then have these moments where it makes you question whether or not you're actually watching a live broadcast, and and then further just show that it's really just a personal hell for Jack Delroy. That would work fine, and I would be all right with that because at least it would be consistent. But with how things end with the script, with the film that we get, it's not consistent in any capacity. It's the opposite of consistent, and that's what makes it so frustrating. Because you're like, man, I really like the mockumentary idea, and I really like the idea of a live broadcast. And then you have these bits and pieces that are from behind the scenes where people are speaking candidly about what's going on and what's happening on this show. And I genuinely did like some of these characters, and I found some of the things interesting in terms of the dynamic between different characters who were featured on the show. And it just drops all of that and it just decides, nah, we're gonna be more like an A24 artsy fartsy horror film now. And I'm like, why? Just embrace your campy, over the top broadcast. That's what you were doing for the majority of the film. Why all of a sudden you're like, we need to be deep. We need to be more like Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy. I just don't understand that mindset. And I know some people say, well, maybe they ran out of money. Even if that's the case, you could still end it like you're watching a real mockumentary. Like, you show what happened after the broadcast, show how it initially led to some success for Jack Delroy and Night Owls, but it was fleeting or something, and they won the ratings war over Johnny Carson that night, but it was the first and last time, because the show was eventually canceled still a couple years later. And you could have a narration talking about how to this day people still debate and doubt whether or not what happened actually happened on screen, and whether or not it was real, and stuff like that. But instead it just completely just loses itself. It just goes and wanders in a completely different direction, and it just loses you. It lost me, and I was like, why? And then when it was over, I was like, that was it. Like, that was the film that people are praising. That was the film that people are saying is a masterpiece, is one of the best films of the year, let alone the best horror film they've seen in years. Like, I mean, it really did feel like a horror anthology episode, like Twilight Zone or some of those other anthology shows. But this time it's an hour and 20 something minutes instead of 30 minutes or 45 minutes long. And it's just one of those movies that the script is just, it's so conflicting. The script, in one way, is one of the best things about the film, in terms of the dialogue, in terms of the broadcast itself, in terms of just providing a decent amount of depth, or at least a decent amount of dynamic for a lot of these different characters that made them likable or interesting in one way or another. When it comes to the people who are working on the show, who work with Delroy, or the psychotherapist, or Lily, or the different guests on the show. And then it just decides, nah, we're just gonna undo all of that, and just decide to be something else. And it feels like a letdown, because you're like, you had all of that and you did all of that. It was doing so well, and then you just decided to just drop it and throw it in the trash and shred it and then start all over with something completely different. And what makes it all the more disappointing is that it's a waste of a great cast. I mean, David Dastmalchian as Jack Dilroy, he's been getting a lot of praise for this, and he deserves it. He's excellent. He's amazing. He's great. I love his performance in this. You really bought him as this talk show host. He had a certain charm and charisma to him, but there were different layers and different nuances that he brought to this character. And you saw him when the cameras weren't rolling, and you saw him as the complete opposite of his talk show persona. You saw him as this guy who's floundering and struggling and dealing with the loss of his wife and all of these other things. And you saw a lot of things about this character that felt very real, which really added to the authenticity of the film, the mockumentary that was initially the whole movie until it decided to just be anything but a mockumentary and just decided to be something else entirely. But David was great. One of the reasons why I liked the film, one of the reasons why, even despite my issues with the script, I might even go as far to say that it's above average, as a movie I wouldn't mind picking up someday down the road on Blu-ray, is because of David. Like, I really love this performance. And I also really like Laura Gordon as June Ross Mitchell, the parapsychologist, the therapist, and Offer. Like, I thought her performance was equally as authentic, equally as strong. I thought it was really great. And I felt that she and David had really good chemistry with one another, and the scenes between the two, and also Lily, like the actress who played Lily, Ingrid Torelli, I thought she was incredible. How she was able to effectively be this sympathetic girl who's the survivor of a cult who committed a mass suicide ritual, and you sympathize with her. You see the damage that she's dealing with, but then when she's supposed to be creepy, when she's supposed to be possessed, like, she also effectively showcased that and was genuinely unsettling and unnerving with the performance. And yeah, I thought it was great. That was a really good performance by her. And I also liked Ian Bliss as Carmichael Haig, the magician turned skeptic, who's a tribute to like James Randi. I really liked that performance. You could tell that that actor was having a blast playing that guy, playing the bad guy. Um, Even Fayssal Bazzi, who played Christou, the psychic who could speak to the dead, like, even that was a pretty good performance. Rhys Auteri, who played Gus McConnell, Jack's sidekick on the show. I also liked his performance. I liked the dynamic that he had with David. Uh, he was genuinely funny when he needed to be too. Um, and I didn't mind some of the other people, like Georgina Haig as Madeline Piper, Jack's deceased wife, Josh Quong Tart as the producer of Night Owls, Leo Fisk. Even somebody like Steve Mozakis, who played Sandor Diabo, who's modeled after Anton LaVey. And Michael Ironside, yeah, the Michael Ironside is in this as the narrator. He narrates the mockumentary. So that was a nice touch, and yeah, it was a good cast. And I just feel that they were ultimately let down in the end, though, by a script that just didn't know exactly what it wanted to be. It just decided it's going to be all these things at once, and I just don't think that's really effective storytelling, and I don't think that's really something that works for a script. You need to pick a direction, pick a path, and stick to it. You can't just be everything. You can't just be mockumentary and live broadcast in the vein of Ghostwatch, and then be a deep thoughts kind of horror film that you would see from A24. You can't be all of those things at once. You have to be one or the other, especially if you're trying to be a mockumentary in particular. You can't just decide I'm not a mockumentary anymore and then say that's the whole point, because I think that's just a cop out. It really is. And it hurts the film in terms of rewatchability factor, because okay, all right, well, the whole point is that it's not a mockumentary and that it's all fake and it's all in the guy's head and he's just crazy, or he's just in hell. Like, if that's the point, like, there's zero rewatchability factor then, where you're like, okay, well, then none of this matters and none of this means anything. So that's, you're just watching it for David's performance and some other people in the film, and that's cool, but I only think that goes so far. And yeah, it's 93 minutes, and then that's with the end credits. But I still think, because of the fact that it starts to lose you at certain points, it's not as effective in terms of the pacing. And I want to mention cinematography by Matthew Temple, as well as the editing by the Cairnes, because I think those elements are pretty solid. And so is the music by Glenn Richards and Roscoe James Irwin. Like, it really did sound like something you would hear from a talk show from the 70s. Like, it was very authentic sounding. Like, it really added to the realism of the overall film. And it's another reason why the film's so disappointing, because you have all these things about it that work so well. It does a good job with the aesthetic in terms of effectively recreating the look and the overall feel of this late 70s talk show. It does a great job with some elements of the story, some not so much, but some really do work. You've got a good cast, you got some capable direction, it's even got some good practical effects at times. You got a lot of things that really do lead to a relatively effective and strong production, but it just doesn't stick the landing. And that's one of the most important things for any sort of story, is the ending, and it just didn't work for me. But I gotta admit, it was still a fun watch. It was still interesting. I'm still glad that I saw it. I would still recommend the film to people, even if they haven't seen it yet, even if they're kind of on the fence about the ending, because maybe you'll interpret it completely different than I did. Maybe you will see it as something that's actually satisfying, and you'll like the swerve, and you'll like the different direction that they take. So I definitely do feel that it's still something that people should check out if they haven't already. But I would say that it's one of the more disappointing films I've seen this year, because of how much of a letdown that ending was for me. But anyway, that's my review of Late Night with the Devil. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.